So rentvesting is essentially renting and living in areas where it's more affordable for me to rent rather than buy, and I'm going to invest in other areas where it's more affordable, more sustainable, and got better growth rates, etc. So the last few years, we've actually seen more of our clients wanting to rentvest or stay living at home, living with their parents, and invest into other areas, especially for clients that's living and breathing in Sydney. So why do people want to keep rentvesting or stay living at home, living with their parents? It's because rent is just too damn expensive and too competitive. Cost of living is skyrocketed the last few years, and also Sydney is just too damn expensive to buy a house. Good day everyone, I'm your host Tony Xia, and thanks for joining me in another episode of the Mortgage Chat. And today I want to talk about rentvesting. So rentvesting is essentially renting and living in areas where it's more affordable for me to rent rather than buy, and I'm going to invest in other areas where it's more affordable, more sustainable, and got better growth rates, etc. So why do they want to rentvest, and why do they want to rent? Well, because they want to live in areas where it's more affordable for them to live and rent rather than buy. Okay, it could be for lifestyle reasons. It could be for it's closer to the city where they work. It could be for the areas they want to live in, for multiple reasons why they want to live in the area. Okay, it's just too expensive for them to buy in that area, and it's actually more cost efficient for them to rent. So the last few years, we've actually seen more of our clients wanting to rentvest or stay living at home, living with their parents, and invest into other areas, especially for clients that's living and breathing in Sydney. So why do people want to keep rentvesting or stay living at home, living with their parents? It's because rent is just too damn expensive and too competitive. Cost of living is skyrocketed the last few years, and also Sydney is just too damn expensive to buy a house. So the average price for a house is around $1.6 million in Sydney. Not everyone has the borrowing power and the deposit to buy something for $1.6 million. And a lot of people don't want to buy an apartment because they just don't find apartments are a good asset to hold for the long term. That's why a lot of people prefer to rentvest, live at home, and invest in other properties in other states. Call it South Australia, WA, Queensland, Tassie, Melbourne, where they can find a lot more affordable properties such as a house to invest in. So the last few years, we've seen an increase in rentvestors or people living at home and want to invest because it's just too damn expensive to buy a home in Sydney. They can't afford it, they can't sustain it, they don't want to affect their living standards, their lifestyle, they still want to spend, they're young, they want to enjoy life a little bit. Therefore, they delay themselves in buying an owner-occupied property in Sydney because they don't want to give up their lifestyle. Essentially, right? So it's more affordable for them to just keep living at home or renting and buy elsewhere. So let's talk about rent versus in Sydney, for example, right? So you could be anywhere. I'm just using Sydney as an example because I live in Sydney. All right. So why do people in Sydney rentvest, right? It's because buying a property in Sydney will cost you around $1.6 million on average, right? For a good area, a decent house, etc. And that's a big problem because borrowing power is going to be an issue for most. Deposit is going to be an issue for most. But even if you get the loan, sustaining the loan, making the repayments, and still maintaining a good lifestyle is going to be a problem because that's actually a pretty big loan you're going to take out, even if you're going to borrow 80% of the purchase price. And you're probably thinking right now, it's like, yes, Tony, but they don't need to buy a house. They can just buy an apartment, right? And it's true, they can, right? But some people don't want to buy an apartment because they don't see value in an apartment and they don't see any growth in apartments, right? So what I mean by this is, yes, the goal is to buy an apartment, hope for it to grow in value. You still add a profit down next 5-10 years, then that profit will allow you to buy a house. And that's probably what your parents would have done back in the days, all right? Apartment was a stepping stone for them. It grew in the same growth rate as the houses, and that allowed them to sell it at a profit and upgrade to a house, which worked well for them. It was perfect for them. But the problem these days is apartments just hasn't grown that fast. Okay, hasn't grown that much or barely at all. Some actually even went backwards in value. And the reason why I say if you buy an apartment today, hope for it to grow in the next 5-10 years, make a big profit, sell it, use the profits to upgrade to a house, it's going to be a lot more harder to do now than before. And the reason why I say this is because there's just so much supply of apartments and there's more apartments going to come up, right? And the build is actually pretty bad these days as well. So you'll see in most areas, apartment prices actually hasn't moved at all. Maybe a tiny bit in some areas, Some areas actually went backwards, but you'll see. So if you compare the growth rate from apartments to houses, it'll be a big gap. Okay, so that's why a lot of these rent investors don't want to buy an apartment, because they understand that. They don't want that liability where they buy this apartment that doesn't grow, and it makes it a lot harder for them to upgrade to a house in the future. So they'd rather just rent the apartment in the areas they want to and invest in other areas where the growth rate might be substantially better. So this touched a bit about, renting an apartment is actually cheaper than getting a loan for an apartment. All right. And I'll give you a quick example what I mean by that. For people that's only listening to this podcast, please jump on YouTube just for this section, because I actually got a little whiteboard here that will map out the difference between buying an apartment and renting out an apartment. Okay. Like I said, so let's use Stanmore as an example. It's near Newtown, it's trendy, it's close to the city. For the younger generations, everybody want to live there right now. All right. So to buy a 1-bedroom apartment in Stanmore, it's around $800,000. Okay. Not cheap for an apartment. I remember I bought my house for $800,000 back in 2015. Bloody hell. So for argument's sake, let's assume the purchase price is $800,000. I've got a 20% deposit and I'm going to borrow $640,000. Also, I'm assuming the rate's going to be 5.5%. Okay, now the rate right now is around 6%, but we're expecting a rate cut, so that's why I'm using 5.5%. At P&I repayments, your monthly repayment is $3,634 per month. All right. Now, because it's an apartment, you have to remember the strata costs. All right. I'm using a minimum of $250 strata costs per month. You got water rates and council rates, obviously. So the total repayments for the month as an expense just to live there, $4,084 per month, just to live there per month. Okay. If I rent a 1-bedroom apartment in Stanmore, it's going to cost me around $700 per week, which equates to around $3,033 per month. And I don't have to worry about strata. I don't have to worry about council rates and water rates. So the difference between buying an apartment for $800,000 and borrowing 80% and renting, it's around $1,050. Okay, that you're saving per month. So this is why I say sometimes renting an apartment is cheaper than buying an apartment. Yes, you buy an apartment, you own a house, it's your home, you got someone to come back to, right? But when you buy an apartment that doesn't grow, that's more of a liability, it doesn't help you in the future, well, what's the point? Okay? And quickly touch on Stanmore, the last 3 years, apartment price in Stanmore actually hasn't grown, right? So the average price in Stanmore 3 years ago, call it October 2021, it was around $860,000. So now in October 2024, apartment prices in Stanmore has actually dipped down to $840,000. So the prices actually went backwards. Give or take, let's just say it stayed the same, right? So if you have an apartment that hasn't grown the last 3 years and all houses all around Australia skyrocketed, that means you put 2 and 2 together, you can buy an apartment in Stanmore that didn't grow, or you can rent there. That's going to cost you $1,000 cheaper to live every month. And you can invest in other areas that's grown 25 to 30% the last 3 years. So guys, I'm not bagging out Stanmore. I was just using that as an example. So what I've just said for someone out there, you can take it as a grain of salt. But what I was doing is I'm just giving you an example of what rent investors are thinking about. Okay, they're forward thinking. They're forward thinking about the future. So this is what your forward thinking, long-term orientated rent investors are doing right now. I'm just going to rent where I want to live. That's going to be a lot cheaper. And I'm going to buy killer properties where it's going to grow a lot more faster than where I want to live. So when they are investing in areas with good long-term growth, call it 8 to 10% with very good rental yield, it's a lot easier for them to sustain and maintain the loan. And in comparison to you buying in an area where it only grows by, call it 2 to 3% or maybe even 5%, getting a massive loan for it, you can't sustain it. You're living off dollar by dollar every month. You can't have a good life. Sometimes rent investing is a more viable option for some of these people. And like I just said to you, if you're buying in areas that's growing by 8 to 10% every year, and the area that you want to buy in and live in only grows by 2 to 3%, and you're not living a good life, well, work out the maths. Rent investing would be the better option for you. So the example on the whiteboard I just showed you about, it's cheaper to rent rather than invest. We actually had this exact same scenario 2 years ago for one of our clients. So they actually wanted to buy the apartment they were renting. And the difference between buying the apartment, getting a loan for it, and renting was about $700 per month. And you know, I gave them the cash flow, I gave them the growth rate of that area, etc. for apartments. They actually changed their mind and didn't want to buy that apartment anymore. They remained renting that apartment, and they actually used the funds they have invested in certain areas. So for example, we actually told them to look at this area in Beckenham, in WA, in Kelso, in Townsville area. And both areas actually grew by around 30% the last 2 years. And in comparison to Macquarie Park, the growth rate for apartments around the area, it actually only grew by 3%. So if you work out the maths, it cost them $700 more to buy the property and it grew by 3%, right? So the maths already didn't work out based on what we've just done for them. So them Rentvesting, purchasing in areas in other states actually worked out a lot more better for them. Even though they had to pay stamp duty, had to pay a higher rate for investment, but the growth was there for them, right? Because it actually grew by 25 to 30%. So for their scenario, it actually worked out a lot more better for them to rent-vest, right? Because it cost them a lot more cheaper to rent the property, and they actually had good growth in the 2 investment properties they invested in. Yes, they pay stamp duty, etc. But you know what? It's a cost of doing business, okay? Yes, they have to pay stamp duty, but you know what? It's a cost of doing business. And I said to him, if you sold the property tomorrow and walk away with all that profit, even if you want to buy a property in Macquarie Park tomorrow, the price is still going to be the same 3 years ago. So the biggest difference is now you got a bigger deposit to purchase this apartment. So you can get a smaller loan and the repayments on that loan will be equal or less than you paying rent. So for these guys, they want to keep on renting and they want to keep on investing. They want to leverage off the investment properties and keep on buying more investment properties. They may have a 7, 8, 9, 10 or even 15-year plan where they want to hold on to all these assets but sell them down the track, have a big lump sum deposit so they can buy their dream home when they're ready down in the future. And some of you guys might be thinking, well, Tony, they can probably buy a house right now to live in and not an apartment. Well, you know what? If they have the borrowing power, if they have the deposit, if they have the cash flow, if they can still maintain a good lifestyle, then so be it. Do it, right? I'll tell you to do it myself. And I will say, go buy now rather than rent-vest, because rent-vesting is not for everyone. I'm not a rent-investor myself. I purchased my home back in 2015 when it's more affordable, more sustainable, and more viable for me to keep. So my next goal is either going to be upgrade a new owner-occupied home or go nutcase on investments, right? But in both scenarios, I'll only go up to a debt level where it's sustainable for me, where I can still keep a life, where I can still enjoy a good life, live a dream, and do what I want to do. Because I'm not one of these people that's interested in trying to accumulate as much debt as you can while you're young. I enjoy the lifestyle. I enjoy having a good life. I enjoy going out. I enjoy going to restaurants. I enjoy buying things that I like. I'm not one of those people that want to live off paycheck by paycheck just so I can get more properties. And you've probably heard this saying, you know, delayed gratification, which pretty much means be a tight ass for, say, the next 5, 10 years, right? And save every penny and just invest it. Well, do you know what, mate? I don't want to be fucking miserable for the next 5, 10 years of my life. Okay, I want to enjoy life a little bit. I just want to get the debt level where it's sustainable and I can still enjoy a life. That's just my personal preference. I'm not against people that want to be frugal, want to live off paycheck by paycheck, want to save every dollar just so they can accumulate more assets. That's fine by them, right? But a lot of my clients, we try to put them in a position where, you know what, they got a good debt level where they can sustain, but they still got good cash flow for personal needs. And that's what we believe in, and that's what I do, and that's what I preach. Okay? So everyone, please only use this as a guide. Don't use it as financial advice. I was just purely only telling you what rentvesting is, why it's become so popular. Now, guys, I'm not saying buying an apartment is the worst thing, okay? Because some of you guys need to buy an apartment for whatever reason. You just need to, right? So I'm not saying don't buy an apartment, okay? I'm just here trying to open up your minds a little bit, telling you what you can and cannot do, what other pathways you can potentially look at, all right? So guys, please only take this as a guide and not financial advice. Please give this video a thumbs up, this channel a follow. My calendar link is below. Please pin in the time if you want to explore some options with me personally. As always, thanks for joining me in another episode of The Mortgage Chat. I'm your host, Tony Xia, and I'll see you next time.